Well, even prior to the current crisis, I mean, um, Niger was the superhighway of refugee-based migration from West Africa through the Sahel into North Africa, then on into Europe. Um, and the main reason for this was economic reasons and political reasons, military coups, etc. Europe had spent a lot of money working with the various governments in West Africa and the Sahel and in North Africa to try and clamp down on this migration, to create programs to keep people at home, to make people feel safer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and it had to some extent succeeded. There was a drop in the numbers of African-based refugees making their way to Europe. But the key again in that is stability. That's one of the reasons why the United States, France, and others have been working on their anti-terrorism cooperation with West African nations and nations in the Sahel to respond to Islamic extremism that was transnational, meaning that it wasn't linked to any given nation. It was Islam that happened to superimpose itself over this region. So you needed to coordinate with different countries. You couldn't just say that it's a problem of Mali, because the groups operating in Mali would go over to Burkina Faso, or they would go over to Niger and then transfer over to Chad or into Cameroon, or go up towards Mauritania or into Algeria. It just spreads all over the place. So you need a coordinated effort, and Niger is the center of that. The United States has two bases, Base 101 and Base 201. One in the capital, and then the other one in the central Niger, on the edge of the Sahara Desert, which happens to be the town which escapes my mind right now. It happens to be in previous stories about migrations. This is where all the immigrants from West Africa meet, in this town, and then they're hooked up with human traffickers who take them across the Sahel to North Africa. So it's the center of this migration. It's also where the United States has its drones, and they use these drones in support of these operations for reconnaissance and for strike capability. France has a contingent of forces in Niger that become more important given the fact that the French contingent that was in Mali has been kicked out. France has a precipitous holding of troops still in Chad, but that's not certain whether they'll remain for long. So when Niger had a coup, it kicked out the government that was pro-French, pro-West, composed of political and economic elites that wanted to sustain the current relationship, and replaced instead by a military junta that said, no, we want to redefine this. We want Niger to be about Niger, not about other countries. This has thrown a curveball into the mix, a monkey wrench, so to speak. France has said that they don't support this, and the United States doesn't support it. ECOWAS, the Economic Organization of West African States, is not just an economic organization, but a geopolitical organization with a military component, and their military council has threatened to invade Niger to reimpose the leader. And so that threat's on the table. France is threatening to help the United States. We don't know where they stand. Meanwhile, Niger says, hey, if you come in here, Mali and Burkina Faso are going to come to our assistance. Mali has a strong Wagner contingent. Burkina Faso is rumored to be developing a relationship with Wagner, and one of Prigozhin's last acts was to have discussions with government people from Niger in Mali to talk about Wagner helping out the Nigerian army. So Wagner's there. That brings Russia, France, the United States, Nigeria, Niger, Mali. All these nations come together in a conflict. I liken this to the African version of Barbara Tuchman's scenario that she put out in her Pulitzer Prize winning book, August 1914, where she talks about Europe's mad rush to war, meaning that everybody knew what was happening was bad, but nobody could stop it. Right now, if you look at all the moving pieces revolving around Niger, any logical person goes, this ain't going to end well. This is going to end very, very badly, but nobody's doing anything to stop it. It's just going worse. And if the fighting starts, it can explode, not just regionally. And understand this, if there's a fight, look at Niger itself. In the north, you have a Tuareg population, ethnically different than the population that's centered around Niamey. The Tuaregs have historically been somewhat independent-minded. Also, they have, because of their religion, Islam, they've become a source of recruiting for many of the ISIS or Al Qaeda affiliated groups that are operating on Niger soil and elsewhere. If there's a fight and the ability of Niamey, the capital of Niger, to effectuate control over all of Niger, because the military resources are now dedicated to fighting in Nigeria, or fighting an ECOWAS incursion from Nigeria, the Tuaregs are likely to rise up. And now you have instability there. So you have internal fighting there in addition to the regional fighting. In Nigeria, there's Boko Haram that operates in the Chad Basin. If the Nigerian army, which isn't doing a very good job against Boko Haram, by the way, is suddenly required to fight a conflict in Niger, Boko Haram becomes more stronger. They'll attack Chad, they'll attack Niger, they'll move into Niger from the south, they'll go into Cameroon, and they'll take over important parts of Nigeria, a major oil producer, gas producer in the world today. So another regional conflict. And every country out there will have aspects of fractures, societal fractures that currently exist but have been papered over. These will widen because of this conflict. So the whole region is going to fall apart in terms of internal conflict, regional conflict, global conflict, if these other superpowers come involved. All that conflict translates into one thing: massive humanitarian disaster. People will be starving to death. People will lose their homes. They'll be fleeing conflict, and they're going to go through the traditional human trafficking route, through Niger, through the Sahel to North Africa. And you're going to see tens of millions of them making this move. And when they get to North Africa, they're all going to be going straight across the Mediterranean into Europe. And Europe is already saturated to the point, so Europe can't bring in any more. And this is going to require Europe to make precipitous decisions that may involve military force, which has the risk of expanding that conflict even further, further fractures. It could lead to political unrest in Europe if more refugees come in and countries haven't done a good job. You know, in Europe right now, every political party has to deal with the question of refugees. What is your policy on refugees? Do you support refugees? Will you send refugees home? Da, 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 da. It's going to become even a bigger issue, and politicians tend to overreact when placed under pressure. So there could be an overreaction in Europe that leads to societal fractures inside Europe, the breaking up of Europe, so to speak. What happens in Ukraine when Russia prevails on the battlefield, pushes the Ukrainian army back past the Dnieper River, and you suddenly have millions of Ukrainian citizens who are uprooted from this, making their way to the Polish border, but the Poles aren't going to let them in because there's already Poland is saturated with Ukrainian refugees. Now you have refugees on the border. It's a humanitarian crisis. There will be a temptation to create a buffer zone to provide humanitarian support that involves putting troops on the ground in Western Ukraine, creating the potential of a NATO-Russian conflict in Ukraine. This could blow out of proportion. So now we come back to Niger. Everybody going, where's Niger? I don't understand. Guys, this could be literally the end of the world, but nobody's paying any attention to it.